To introduce myself, I'm Cody McKinley. I'm the Assistant Vice President, National Pork Producers Council, and help with the national and state relations. And I have two esteemed colleagues here joining me. The first is Kent Bang, who's the Director of Swine Lending at Compeer Financial. And Kent grew up in eastern Nebraska and graduated from the University of Nebraska with a BS in Animal Science and focused in agricultural business. He spent 17 years in swine genetics and nutrition business and as a swine industry consultant with Purina Mills and Archer Daniels Midland, working across the U.S. and the international customers in Europe and Southeast Asia. For the past 25 years, Kent has financed large commercial operations at pork producers, and during those years, he served as a swine industry specialist, VP of Commercial Swine Lender, Senior Swine Credit Analyst, Regional Vice President, currently serves as the Director of Swine Lending with Compeer Financial. And Kent served 2 terms on our board, the National Pork Producers Council, and he currently serves on the NPPC PAC Committee, and also has served 2 terms on the Executive Committee of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. And so Kent and his wife Julie live in Omaha and have 2 adult sons and 1 grandson. To get us started, we kind of walked through a few slides here just to look at how we got to today. I think as everyone kind of recognizes, well, first I guess we have the missions of NPPC here. But I think everyone recognizes that, for so long we viewed sow housing as really 2 options. One is the, kind of traditional sow individual care and gestation stalls, and then group housing. And it's kind of been viewed just as the 2 categories. And I think over the last few years, that has matured and moved into several different variations of that. And so when we start to talk about these and the costs associated with them and how they fit into Proposition 12, I think it's important to recognize the differences of each, the benefits of each, and just like any tool on the farm, they are a tool, and the real welfare of the animal comes to the individual and the person caring for those animals. And so when we start to look at those states that have viewed the 2 alternatives of gestation stalls versus group housing, we've seen a wave here of states that have taken ballot initiatives and or legislative action against one or the other, and specifically against gestation stalls in this case. And so when you look at Florida, Arizona, Oregon, Colorado, California, 2 bites at the apple there that we're going to talk a little more about, Maine, Michigan, Ohio, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And there were also legislative efforts in the states there at the bottom that you see. And so when you look at the country as a whole, where that really lies us, you see those states and how they're geographically spread. And you'll notice that a number of them are in areas where there's not too much pork production, but heavy in human population. And so when you start to understand the differences of states and how they take on policy and policy development, just kind of give you guys an idea of where those states are that take initiatives and ballot propositions, both with legislative initiatives and constitutional amendments. And so just to kind of lay the groundwork for how we got to where we are today. But today we're really going to focus on how this conversation's changed over the last few years, especially since Massachusetts really focused, was the first step in taking it past that original gestation stall ban and moving into the sales of products that were raised that way. And then one step further, that was in 2016 and 2018, California did the same with the ban on sales of gestation pork that comes from gestation stalls, and started to put in requirements on space and the use of breeding stalls. And just to help everyone get into perspective, the size of California, it's 14% of the total U.S. economy. It's 10% of the Fortune 1000 based companies are in California. 5th largest company in the world. If you took the state of California, removed it from the United States, it'd still be the 5th largest in the world. Largest state population in the U.S., 12% of the overall U.S. population, and there, as we highlight at the bottom, is kind of our bread and butter of our consuming base. 39.3% Hispanic and Latino, and then additional 15.3% in Asian Americans. Those are heavy pork consumers, folks, and so we recognize the need to fill this order and view California as a very valuable market to the pork industry.
Well, hey, it's good to be with you here at the Iowa Pork Congress. Again, I'm Kent Bang. I'm with Compeer Financial, and the stuff I'm going to share with you here this afternoon is really a condensed version of some work that our team did, our swine team at Compeer did, in conjunction with a number of our clients that are already moving ahead with some Prop 12-like agreements that they have. So they're not Prop 12 per se, but they are agreements to allow 24 square feet and essentially the same criteria that Prop 12 would have as we knew it. So I want to move forward with that, and again, it's good to be with you here today. I want to share a condensation down to really three methods of what we think prepare a farm for Prop 12, or three ways to go about it that we're seeing done. The first one would be simply a reduction of the sow herd to meet the gestation space that's there by reconverting that into all pens, as Michael laid out. No change to farrowing, but 24 square foot per sow from the day that she's weaned until she goes back into the farrowing crate. So clearly most of our individual maternity housed sow barns would have about 14 square feet for the sow, probably another 2 to 4 square feet that you could pick up in the alleyway. So that's about something like a 25% reduction in the amount of space available. So the first one that I'm going to walk through would just be simply that, to reduce the sow herd. And clearly everybody here in this room knows that that's going to be inefficient from a standpoint of utilization of the available farrowing, likely anyway. The second one would be a little more common and a little more cost effective, but that would be to reconstruct or reconfigure the barn to meet the 24 square feet of housing and add gestation space to fully utilize the farrowing that is there. So I want to talk through that as well. And then the third thing is new construction, and I want to share at least what we've seen from a standpoint of cost. But again, standard farrowing crates somewhere between 5x7 and 6x8 from farrowing crate size. And then open pen gestation with 1 up to maybe 6 weeks of free access stalls, maybe more in some instances. And then gilts as well. Important to remember that the California law as it stands and the requirement that others are seeing from a retail standpoint, at least today, that I am aware of, which clearly is likely not everything, is that gilts over 6 months also have to be housed. And so I was having a discussion earlier today. If you've ever seen a 6-month-old, 36-month-old gilts in one pen that are at 24 square feet, what does that look like? Empty. That's what it looks like. That's a lot of space for a gilt like that, but that's the requirement. So these are what I want to walk through quick. I'm not going to try and capture everything. I was required to kind of keep it under 10 minutes, and I'm just shocked that Michael did it, so I'm going to try too. First, I think the biggest consideration, and this is before we really get into it, really is the consideration around what is existing, and that's probably the hardest thing for me to do, is to stand up here, tell you about costs of reconstruction, what we're seeing from costs, because every barn is clearly different. And I think those are the first decisions that have to be made, is evaluation of what's there. First is the barn age and condition. Does it really make sense to put significant capital back into the existing gestation facility? And that's, that decision you'll have to make. The building and gestation style, really what is there today, and how do I get to 24 square feet with what I have, and what does that pen design look like? And lots of different variations, and what's available and what people are utilizing. We have clients that are very successful with ESF systems of various kinds, with stanchion head gates, feeding in a trough just with drop feeders, as you typically would in a pen design. lots of different configurations that can work, and I think Cody said it earlier, it's about animal husbandry is about the people and making that system work. So lots of different variations and opportunities there. The barn dimensions, what's there and what do you have to work with, what do you have to add, and then finally, one more, slats. This has been a real interesting one as some of these designs have been moved from individual maternity housing to pen design, just tearing off the cap that was laid down under the front half of the sow, the alleyway, and the troughs, which in some cases is really not that simple without destroying the slat underneath it. And it really depends on not so much the age of the barn or the quality of the slat, but what was done when that cap was put on it. So another consideration that's critically important. We've had one client that tore into the barn. You start tearing up the concrete between there and figure out that nobody laid down anything between the slat and the concrete that you poured on top of it. So you destroy the slats under it. So lots of considerations from that standpoint. And the following one is permitting. I mean, if you're going to add gestation space, can you get it permitted in your area? And that's a local kind of issue for you as well. What we are seeing a lot more of, and so I wanted to include it in here about what's being used, and I mentioned 1 week, 6 weeks, maybe even longer in free stall or free access stalls, and kind of a way that at least we think is a good way to manage sows from a standpoint of allowing them to get in, the timid sows to get away from others, ability to lock them down so that you can breed and let them back out again, and have free access behind them. I think there are some groups that started with free access through the whole facility that we work with years in the last 8 to 10 years even. Very expensive to build a whole facility that way. My opinion personally, this is personal experience, and sometimes that gets us in trouble, is that week from, or that time period from when I wean a sow till I breed her, so that's 5 days, maybe a week, is the most detrimental time for, sows, when you wean them, they fight many, many times. They fight terrible. And to even have 1 week before you move into a pen in something that timid sow could get away, I think is extremely helpful. And so this is an option, at least one. Most of the clients that we have using this and building something to meet the 24 square foot all pen design are using something like 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks of this so that they can manage the sows, manage preg testing, manage recycles, et cetera, before they group them into pens. So probably could just say, this doesn't make a lot of sense. No change in gestation, just reducing the sow numbers, and I think for most it would not. But again, every situation is a little bit different, and so maybe you have a unique facility design, weaning age, et cetera, or desires down the road that this makes some sense. So I wouldn't take it off of the chart completely, but it is going to add, I think, fixed costs to the building, just clearly less output from somewhat the same fixed costs. Reduced sow herd just is very, very costly for repayment and recapture of investment into the farm as it is. Reduced biological performance, I add all those up, it's somewhere around $17 to $18 a pig. Just doesn't make sense to me, but again, every situation is different, and so there likely would be somebody that this would make the most sense for. And then downtime while you're remodeling, clearly that's an issue as well. So probably a more reasonable approach, or a more practical approach, fully utilizing the existing farrowing, adding gestation space to the barn or to the site, and really add 33% gestation space to get this done. Remodeling that existing space is pretty expensive. I think we've seen costs generally, and generally scary, but $600 a sow or somewhere in that ballpark. It's fairly expensive to rip the equipment out, dispose of it, put new equipment in that barn. So that would capture all of that. And gestation space, any new construction, which I'll get to in a minute, is expensive, and we're adding gestation space to this. So this is a little more practical. I come up with annualized costs over the life of that equipment, just to cover the cost of about $4.70 a pig. Your math's going to be different, but this is what I've come up with on an average of a number of farms. And that's considering no biological change, right? So that's a question as well. Can we do this and accomplish it, in pen design with no biological change in performance? And I question that. I think we can get there. It's going to take some work and challenge and change to get there, but that is possible. So 470, and that I'll talk about this a little bit later, but you need some return on that investment. I don't think you can invest this kind of capital and not get some return, and this would cover your cost. New construction, I'll finish up with that, but costs that we're seeing, the top line there, a typical open pen gestation, not Prop 12, not 24 square feet, typical something that would be 19 or 20 square feet likely per sow in pen gestation. Costs are just scary high, and you guys all know that today, but it's $3,000 to $3,300 a sow. Prop 12 is going to add about $600 to $700 a sow to that number. So very expensive to do. A lot of the range, I mean, I get it that that's a big range, but it's really dependent on, GDU, how big, filtered farm or not, some design differences, obviously, site differences, et cetera, but pretty wide range, but kind of the middle of that range is what I think you'd probably find the most of. Gestation versus free access. So you've got about a $650 variance is what I'm showing here. Increased costs about $362, again, if no change in production, and that's over an expected lifetime of the equipment. I used a 10-year on this. Clearly, you're building a 30-year facility, but the equipment's not likely 30 years. I hope there's no equipment guys in here, but likely not 30 years. And then figuring at 26 PSY. So I think the cost is high, but I think the cost per pig on the additional, probably as you look at it, at least in the example overall, that I would say new construction is the most financially the lowest cost, but again, you got to figure in return on investment, et cetera, before you get to a final number and decision. And again, every facility is different. I can't stress that enough. Additional production costs. So I talked a lot about it from if production is equal. What are the differences? Just quickly, do we have increased sow mortality? I think we do if we mix sows right out of farrowing. Increased non-productive days, again, same issue there. I think reduced farrowing rate, getting recycles bred. I think we can get pretty good at this in open pen gestation. I know we can because I've seen it, but this is a new challenge mixing pigs right out of, or mixing sows right out of farrowing. So, and decrease in pigs born alive, I believe, depending on how we mix those. I'm old school. I've been around a long time, as you guys probably know, but I've taught from a very young age that when we mix sows in the first 28 days, and more specifically between day 3 post-breeding to day 28 or so, you are going to experience embryo loss. So I think this is an issue we have to get comfortable with and get around, and somehow get them mixed either before day 3 post-breeding, which we're doing in all the Prop 12, or we have a way to separate them till day 28. And then just the overall impact of PSY as we look at cost. A few additional costs to consider, and again, this varies from farm to farm, but what pig flow issues does it create? for your nursery finishing flow. What flow efficiencies all the way around? Is there an increase in G&A, particularly if I'm reducing sow numbers on a farm? Additional depreciation is one issue, additional debt is another, and then increased utility cost, possibly. If you're in central Minnesota, a day like yesterday, in a barn that's got 24 square feet versus one that's got 18, you're going to use more heat, I'm going to guess. Some other considerations I think that are important. So I know there's a lot of discussion around contracts and agreements and all of that. One thing that concerns me is number one, around the terms of the contract. You know, if I've got 5 years, what happens if I have a disease issue like PRRS in that farm that costs me 9 months of production out of there, or 3 months of production? How do I catch that up? If that does happen, where do I find pigs that are Prop 12 compliant to fill what I lost on my farm? And I don't think they're available. I would think if they are, they're going to be maybe a cost that one doesn't want to spend. The other one, investment in long-term assets need to be, you know, we need to have a long-term return. And I think we're building 30 and 35 and 40-year assets in a new farm. We have to be looking long-term, and you all know that.